Hello everyone, this is Martin. I'm making this video as a tutorial to help people get started on practicing HTML and CSS with VS Code, as well as reviewing some of the important Flexbox properties and getting you started. So some of this code I got from the Wes Bose Flexbox tutorials, but I've made my own modifications to it. So the first step you want to do when you're making a new web page is you have to create your HTML file and your CSS file. I've already done this. I've created an HTML file. This is pretty basic, just your standard boilerplate HTML tags. And then we have a link to my CSS file. So in HTML, you can use a style element and put all your CSS inside there, or you can use the link element to link your CSS file to your HTML. The reason we do this is so we can separate our CSS file into a separate file, and it makes it easier to read, and then you can have two files open at once. It's also something that we call the separation of concerns. So sometimes we like to separate out different types of code so that it's easier to work on pieces of the project. So um, you'll see here we just have a div, which is a block level generic HTML element. Think of it like a box. I think div stands for like divider or something. Um, and then we have some more divs in here that have been given some classes. Notably, they're all given this box class, which is defined in our CSS. And they're also given a numbered box class, which will basically just change the background color of the box. So this is nice because it gives us um, a nice, highly visible web page to practice with. If we go ahead and right click the page and click inspect, what that's going to do is that's going to open up our Chrome DevTools. So in our Chrome DevTools, if you inspect an element on a web page, it's going to open up to the Elements tab of the DevTools, and it's going to have selected the element that you right-clicked and inspected. So the cool thing about DevTools is we can see the version of the web page that the web browser is loading, and we can also put our mouse over different elements, and it's highlighted in light blue, and then there's like padding highlighting and border highlighting and margin highlighting according to colors. So that's really useful. If we click on if we click on these different boxes, or sorry, not click on them, but mouse over them, we can see, basically where they start and they end, so where their edge is, right? And exactly how large they are. So in order to get feedback from your web page as you are working on it, it's super useful to do this, to have DevTools opened up so that you can see in detail exactly where your elements are, what they're doing, what their sizes are, and all of their applied CSS settings here in the Styles tab here. You can also specifically look at individual elements and look at the computed box. This will show you exactly the computed size of your elements on the page. You can see as I, change the height of this web page, web page view, it's actually changing on this calculation here. So this is all live. So it's very, very important that you know about Chrome DevTools. The shortcuts to open it are Control Shift I or Command Shift I or something like that, depending on if you have um, a Windows computer or a Mac computer. You can also right-click elements and click Inspect. You can also get here through the options 3-dot bar, I think. So there's a lot of ways to open up DevTools. A cool thing about DevTools is you can also pick specific screen sizes or display sizes to look at for all these different devices, or just a general responsive view. This allows you to check that your design looks good on all these different screen sizes. Okay, so far we've learned probably the basics about Flexbox. And we know that in order to activate Flexbox, we have to use the display flex setting. So on our container, which is just the div that is surrounding all these boxes, we have set the minimum height to 100 VH, which means 100% of the view height, the viewport height. And then we've set the width to 100 VW, which is 100% of the viewport width. And then we've also made this a flex container with the display flex setting. And you can see that in your DevTools, you will see this little flex setting here for any container that has Flexbox enabled on it. I also have a commented out border setting because I didn't really want border, but you can comment that in if you want. And it's basically, the path changed, I think. It's basically just a 10 pixel border, but this is like just optional if you want some kind of page border or container border to see the container. So from this, we can see that the container is taking up the full width and height of the web page. And okay, so if we look at the box settings, we have not specified height for these boxes at all. This box class, it just has font size and text align center and text shadow and padding. So there's padding on the inside of these boxes. And then these box classes here are just background color settings. And this right here, this is just setting the width of the box to be 33.33333%. So that's kind of interesting that it's just being ignored right now. This width setting is not really doing anything right now. And the reason for that is probably because by default, the flex wrap setting in Flexbox is set to no wrap by default. So you'll see if we comment this out and refresh, it appears the same. If we comment, and we can actually see on the container that flex wrap is just set to no wrap. So the first thing that's kind of interesting is when you change this so that the flex wrap setting is wrap, suddenly all these boxes stack they stack, and you'll notice now the width setting of 33.333% is being applied, which is interesting. Interesting indeed. Um, so the cool thing about this is if you don't specify if you don't specify a height for these boxes, um, then by default they're going to try to be um, like altogether only as tall as the minimum height. However, if you have enough content inside them such that they bump outwards, then they will overflow. So um, we can see this also by giving the box a height of something like 500 pixels. When we do this, because we now have set a specific height, it's pushed this box down, so this container is now larger, right? Because it's the container has a minimum height of a certain amount, but that doesn't mean it can't expand, right? It can overflow nicely. So it's important to note some of these default behaviors, right? Okay, so if we take flex wrap off, this goes back to all the default behavior. We see that for this container, all of these items are stretched vertically. And that's because by default, the align items property is set to stretch by default. Now, if you change this, suddenly, when you change the align items property, you'll notice that these boxes are no longer taking up the full height of this page. They are instead taking up as little required space as possible to fit their padding and their number text in there. So it's very important to understand that there are default settings to Flexbox when you apply display flex. Okay, so you need to be aware of what all those default settings are so that you're not confused by the flex behaviors, right? So in this view, if we turn on wrapping onto a new line, then it will pay attention to this width setting here. And also, it'll pay attention to the width setting. And that's interesting. We see that it has stacked, but there's extra space. I believe this is because of like the align content defaults as well. So, a lot of things can happen with these flex settings. So I'm going to kind of walk you through when I'm thinking about building some kind of layout, how I go about it, right? So first thing I do is I create some kind of container, right, for my content. I probably want to set this container to be minimum height value to fill up the viewport and 100% of the width of the viewport or the web browser window. If I want this to be a Flexbox container, I put display flex on here. And, these other settings are all going to be very much dependent on what type of layout I'm trying to make. So let's look at a layout here. Instead of 33 0.33%. We're going to just say 20%. And then we're going to give these boxes a height of 200 pixels. And so after display flex, I usually like to set justify contents, because flex direction. So flex direction, by default, it's set to row. And then justify content, we're going to say center. See if that does anything different. So by default, the flex direction is set to row, which is from left to right. If we say row reverse, we see that it flips. It's now from right to left. If we say column, it all stacks, which is a little interesting. This is stacking because the flex wrap settings are different when you're dealing with a column layout, right? And this page overflow just goes down. And then if we do column reverse, it's going to reverse the order of these. So let's put this back to flex direction row. You don't have to define this if you just want it to be this by default, because this is the default setting. Then for justify content, this is how the content is spaced on the main axis. So remember, we set our main axis with this flex direction property right here. So our main axis is from left to right. It's horizontal from left to right. Let's look at some of the other justify content settings, like space evenly. Well, notice there's no change, and that is because our boxes are set to a percentage width. Okay. But if we want to set our boxes to just be a minimum width of, let's say, minimum width of like 50 pixels. Now they're back on one line. They're back on one line, and if we actually full screen this, I think we can get these to wrap. Yeah. So we've set their height to be 200 pixels. Their minimum width is 50. We can actually set this to like I don't know, like 75 or something like that. We can also set the width as well to like 200, or the max width. Let's set the max width to like 200. Okay, so here we have some interesting behavior. I've set the minimum required width to 75 pixels, and the width to 200. So if we actually get rid of this, let's see if it does anything. Oh, I guess it's just setting the width here. So we're just going to say width is 200. So with width being 200 and this flex wrap setting set to wrap, as soon as these boxes can't be 200 pixels wide, they wrap onto a new line. And you see that they are wrapping in order, and they can wrap on multiple lines, which is interesting. So we have some extra vertical space because remember the align items setting is for the alignment of our boxes along the cross axis, which is vertical. Right now it's set to flex start, which means it wants to be at the top if possible. If we set this to center, it will instead try to center itself while still wrapping. So, which is pretty cool. If we change this width setting to like 100 pixels, you'll notice they're all in the middle now. But if we get them too close, they will wrap, and the two different lines of content will actually be centered. If you want to further affect the extra space, you use the align content setting. There's like baseline center end, flex end, flex start. Let's see what space around does. No. So this align content property will align the content and the extra space of the cross axis. So you see there's a difference between align item center and align item center, align content center, and align item center, and align content just being its default setting, which I believe by default it's like flex start, or is it just like baseline or something? I think the default is like baseline or something. But anyway, so you can see that all of these different flex settings, they all can interact with each other, right? Our flex direction matters because that sets our main axis and our cross axis. Our justify content setting matters because that will determine how these items are spaced along our main axis. You know, we change this, we change the behavior of the page. The flex wrap setting is also important because it will determine whether your items try to wrap or not. If you don't have wrapping, sometimes it causes leaking, like you see right here where the 10 is kind of leaking out of the box because the box is not wide enough. So all these settings matter and they are all like interacting with each other. So when it comes to making like larger page layouts, we often will subdivide our Flexbox settings so that we have like rows of content inside of a container. And then we'll make those rows also into Flex containers. So you know, you can make all kinds of page layouts with this, all kinds of responsive page layouts with Flexbox. Um, but you do need to have a grasp on how to uh, play around with these settings to get the behavior to be what you want. So I always recommend going in this kind of an order conceptually, thinking about flex direction, justify content, flex wrap, whether it's on or off, and then your align items, and then align content. There are other important flex settings as well, but these are, I think, the core starting um, properties you really need to be familiar with and wrap your head around. So go ahead and play around with this example. You're welcome to write your own code yourself and make whatever template you want with this. I highly recommend you experiment with changing all these different settings around and see what happens and what types of templates you can get and what types of behavior you're getting. Yeah, so get in here and experiment with all these HTML and CSS settings. If you break anything, you can just undo it, right? And have fun.